Hey, good afternoon. I'm Bobby Halton, and welcome to today's Humpday Hangout. Today we've got RJ James, we've got Jake Hoffman, we've got Ryan Pennington, and Dennis LeGear, who's coming to us from somewhere west of the Rockies. It's an undisclosed location. So we're really glad to have all of these great folks joining us today. We want to talk to you today about hoseline movement, but first a word from our sponsors, and that would be our good friends at FDIC. Registration is open. Make sure you get a chance to go over there and throw down your signature, get your room early, make sure you get in there in time to see Jake and Ryan and Dennis and RJ. They'll all be there doing one thing or another. So registration is open. We'd love to see you. Also, the Alamo Area Fools are putting on a conference at the end of October. Go to their website. It's a mental health kind of symposium deal, but they're really bringing in some rocking people, and they'll be down there on the river walk. So check out the Alamo Area Fools and your local Fool chapter for whatever training and education they may be bringing to your neighborhood, and take advantage of it. There's always great stuff going on all across the country. So pay attention and hopefully take advantage of it. But today we're really grateful we had to our buddies for joining us. This is a really important topic, and few guys that I know of speak more eloquently to it. RJ spends an incredible amount of time involved in training and an incredible amount of time involved in evaluating what he's doing on his job. Jake has really done some really great introspective work, and he's really clear on how he likes to handle himself on the fireground. And if you follow either one of those guys, you totally get what I'm talking about. Ryan's got an incredibly unique background where he's spent an incredible amount of time looking at some of the unique barriers we have to handline movement in regards to the context that we often find ourselves in, right? Our training sometimes takes place in these really, pristine environments and parking lots, and Ryan consistently points out that, where we tend to fight fire can be anything but, and easy to move around. And finally, Dennis has just spent an incredible amount of time. Dennis LeGear, if you've read any of his work, you know that he's spent an incredible amount of time evaluating not just water and hydraulics, but also all the appliances, all the devices, the hose, and how they contribute to the overall system. And Dennis has written extensively on it, speaks extensively on it, presents all around the country. He'll be at FDIC, and his work on true diameter really was kind of spurred the industry to take it more seriously. Put a lot of great focus on all of that. And so Dennis is just a wealth of knowledge, and just want to say thanks to everybody for joining us here today. So
you give beautiful introductions.
Well, I've known you nitwits for so long, it's easy. It's easy. So RJ, why don't you start it off? You and I had a little discussion earlier about what we wanted to talk about today. Handline movement and all of that stuff. And why don't you start off and get everybody going?
Awesome, thanks, Chief. So one of the things I thought would be pretty cool to talk about was the practice of our people for the preparation of the fireground incidents. And this came to me actually last night. And, Ryan and I were talking about our new aerial scope that we have in Rockville. And literally, we slammed a brand new fire truck in front of our people. And as it pains me to say it, a lot of our people, other than the people on the committee, had no experience with it at all. They didn't get a chance. I mean, just as quick as we got it, it left to go to the beach for Ocean City. It came back for a couple of weeks, did some minor repair stuff. Went back to the Tool Mountain place, came back, went to Jersey for the show in Wildwood, came back. They did a dedication and the things in service on Saturday. So a lot of members never even really touched the truck before it went in service, never even saw where things were mounted. Yesterday, so for those that don't know, Rockville Volunteer Fire Department, we have set duty nights. So you have a Monday through Sunday duty night. So yesterday's Tuesday night duty shift, they never even saw anything on the truck. So we're also expected to be able to put this thing in service on the fireground Tuesday night. So, I had to figure out something to do with these people on the Tuesday night shift to get them acquainted with the truck. Not only that, we had to figure out how is everybody going to move, how's everybody's operations going to be with this truck, right? We've never done any training with this truck as a group. So I had to figure out something, right? And so I have people who are also individually working on their own checkoffs. So each unit in Rockville has a checkoff that you have to do. You have to do a checkoff process to be minimum staffing on the engine, a checkoff process to be minimum staffing on the tower, a checkoff process to be minimum staffing on the rescue squad. And it's a couple pages of performance objectives. So I had multiple people come up to me and say, hey, I need to work on force by entry. All right, cool, we'll get that done. Hey, I need to work on setting up PPV. Okay, we'll get that done. Hey, RJ, I need to practice throwing ladders. Okay, we'll get that done. Hey, Cap, can I stretch lines? And at this point, I'm like, all right, well, I've just made everybody all these promises. I'm not going to be able to really effectively hit all this in one night. So I was getting to thinking, I'm like, all right, how can I pull this off so I can get something to everybody? And then it dawned on me, I was like, let's just run box alarms. We'll run simple box alarm drills in the parking lot at the firehouse. I said, everybody get on the rig. So everybody gets on the rig, and we literally walked out everybody's movements. And I got to thinking about this, and I said, like when I have a hard time trying to comprehend something for myself in the fire service, either it's me learning for myself or me teaching to somebody else, I resort back to football. I did a lot of football in my younger years, a lot of football in high school. I played semi-pro for the DC Generals football, fire department, police football team. I go back to football. And I literally thought to myself, all right, what would Coach Marzalek do with this situation? What would Coach Weller do with this situation? All right, cool. I got a lot of people who don't know what to do. That's the whole reason why we're doing this training, right? So I got it. Well, this is what we'll do. Let's walk out the plays like a pregame. All right. So literally, that's what I did. I had everybody sit in their seats. All right. Well, the engine, the guy running the line on the engine. All right. What's your plan? What's your movements? What are you bringing? What are you doing? Cool. You go to your spot and do it. Guy riding the entry on the tower. What's your plan? What's your tools? What are you doing? Cool. Go to your spot. So literally, I'm sitting out there, and I'm actually sitting there like my football coach used to sit, like this. And coordinating the movements and literally making sure everybody gets to their spot. And then the best thing we can do is literally start slow and walk everybody to their spots. And then, all right, let's run another one. Now let's pick up the speed a little bit. Let's run another one. And and that's what we did in football. It was half speed, 3/4 speed, all right, full speed. And then we literally ran through those scenarios last night. And it helps everybody get into the system, right? You got the guy getting off the tower with the tools, which, by the way, we have brand new tools, which they're not familiar with because it's a lot different. We ordered some better tools than what we had last time. So now they're going through the motions on the forcible entry door using the brand new tools we have. We got the tower driver. His first opportunity wheeling this thing is during the drill. So other than the driver training that he did, so now he's going through the motions of what's his system for getting off and bringing lights and then cord reels and that kind of stuff. I got my person working on their line stuff. I got her stretching her line, and she's coming around her line, and she's got to come in between the back of the engine and the front of the tower with the truck guys bringing all their tools. So literally, I thought that this episode would have been cool to talk about what do you guys do, what do other people do as far as training their people on the movements of just where do we go from the rig. And me and Chief was chatting it up with a little bit prior to this. And then when I got on here and seen all you cool cats, I was like, oh, this is going to be cool. So what do you guys think? How did I play that right or what?
Yeah, box alarm drills are definitely a way to show the orchestry that occurs on a fireground. And to me, probably some of the most important things is just to cut things down to basics. So when I discuss like fire streams in the fire service, I just try to keep everything to like blocks of 3. So I'll go like source, force, and streams, which for most of us equals hydrant, pump, and hose and nozzles. Because to me, if you don't understand the basic ingredients, you're never going to be able to execute on the fireground. Because when you get to a fireground, you take your basic ingredients and then you make the right cake for that fireground. And since we all know that like spec and layout dictate strategy and tactics on the fireground, and jurisdictional infrastructure response model and the number of people on the fireground are going to impact the way that you spec and lay out your rig. So, you're talking about box alarm drills. If I went to a fire department, we walked through some box alarm drills, and let's say that fire department's changed significantly in the last 30 years, and they're still in a triple finish, a triple load. And when that started, when they added it to the rigs in the 70s, there was just large farmhouses, good space between buildings. And then from the 70s to now, 50 years later, basically, now it's more of a tighter suburb urban fire department. And it's like, well, maybe we should point out during this box alarm drill, let's try to pull this triple next to these cars. And it's like, well, that doesn't work so good. So when it was originally in concept in that fire department, it might have been the best load, right? So where would the triple load be like the best? Well, if you load it in the crosslay, and let's say you work for a fire department where the truck's extremely delayed or is not coming at all, and the first engine can line right up on the front walkway, and the setback's usually 30 feet or greater, I can't think of a better load for a lightly staffed fire department that can line their crosslay up on the front door. So again, just like we were saying with this box alarm training you did, modified minimum, attack finish, a bundle finish of 100, you have to look at your response model and, more importantly, your jurisdictional infrastructure to understand how you should load the rig to get the most effective movement on the fireground based on your situation. Because, fire is not a local phenomenon. It's a physical phenomenon. We should all be extinguishing with relatively similar techniques between water mapping and deployment of fire streams and velocity and gallonage. But the way you get there, the way the hose comes off the rig and how many people are involved in the stretch is going to be different. It's going to be a local decision, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. You guys feeling me on that?
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said, Dennis, but I think that the final point is the most important one, right? I think that there's basic fundamental skills in handling hose line, or to RJ's original point, ladders and basic tasks, how they happen in context, right, on the fire ground, are the difference between, success and failure. So, whether you're using the Minuteman load, the horseshoe load, the triple load, whatever loads work best for the environment that engine company or truck company finds themselves in, whatever kind of deployment we're talking about, is great. But then it's always, it's that, as Tommy Brennan used to say, it's the thinking firefighter, right? Who can take that particular task set that he's honed through drill and evolution and experience, whatever amount that they have, and then utilize it at the right time, right? So if you're doing if you're normally a hydrogen group that suddenly finds themselves drafting, there's going to be a lot of adaptation and change, and that's fine. But some of the basic skill stuff that I think you've done a great job, in talking about, especially when we talk about hose, in helping people to understand, it doesn't change much, right? Nozzle reaction, how different, configurations of hose and nozzle and such help you to move water, and the type of delivery system you put together. So I think that the context is always where we get to that decision making, because oftentimes I hear people saying about, oh, we should do, everything should be the same, and it's like nothing could be further from the truth. There's, obviously, having fought fire in the area of California that you fought fire in, you guys had some unique elevation issues, and I've been in your community and the Oakland Hill fires, man. Right there, you get a lesson in freaking elevation and fire spread like over freaking night, and then you out and go visit somebody, say in Kansas, and they see a speed bump and they decide they could ski on it. So it's like, no disrespect to Kansas, but it's flatter in a lot of things. So there you go, right? So the different areas, different lays, but really well put. I'd like to bring Ryan and Jake in on this, because I know Jake talks a lot about moving water, and love to hear what they think, and a lot about fireground consistency.
Go ahead, Jake.
All right. going on to what RJ had said, there's a lot of guys that are making that analogy to football, and I think that for whatever reason, a lot of times that gets lost in translation. Like people are like, oh well, it's just sports, right? I mean, what could that possibly have to transfer over? Guys like, I know I've talked with Kyle Sampson before about there's no NFL team that's doing full contact practice on Wednesday and Thursday, right? I mean, they're saving full contact for for Sunday. The rest of the week, they're in helmets and t-shirts and shorts, maybe shoulder pads. And we try to instill that crawl, walk, run into our recruits from the beginning of the academy. And so that would start, for example, the way that our drill school is built is we will do different modules and different rotations. So when they're in hose week, it's broken down kind of in that rule of threes. We're going to give them limited options and tell them, all right, these are your choices and these are why you might make these decisions. So for example, Toledo, we have some interesting setups. We don't have any cross lays. All of our pre-connects come off the back. And we have 75-foot hose lengths because we've had those for years and years. So looking left to right on our hose beds, we have what we call our short bank, which is 150-foot pre-connect, the long bank, which is 225, our 2.5 pre-connect, 5-inch, 3-inch across the bed. And so basically we're like, look, you need to know, is it short bank, long bank, or 2.5? And as a rookie, that's not generally going to be the decision they're making on the back of the rig. But in drill school, we try to get them thinking, all right, yes, this house is close enough to the street. This place is bigger. I'm probably going to need this line. And then we say, all right, are you going to take that nozzle and pull straight to the door? Are you going to have to pull past and see the far side so you can clear the bed and flake this line out as possible? Or if the house is right on top of the street, kind of do the Steve Robertson figure 4 off the back of the rig where you pull the line, go across the street, and then take the nozzle and coupling to the door. And so we start with that. And then when we get to our extinguishment or our fire attack module of our academy, we kind of do the same thing. We do walkthroughs, and there's no fire at the beginning. And we're just doing walkthroughs. All right, your job is going to come up. You're going to force the door. You're going to stretch the line. Driver's doing this. And then throughout the week, we basically turn it into full box alarm drills by about Tuesday afternoon. So Tuesday afternoon through Friday, we're dispatching multiple engine companies, a truck, a squad, however many recruits we have at the time. They're all getting sent and dispatched, and we try to stagger their arrival to kind of mock what you're going to see, at least in the inner city. So they'll be about 30 seconds to 60 seconds apart, and really kind of try to immerse them in as real an environment as possible in training, which is completely different from what I did. I had some great instructors and training staff, but we just lit the burn building on fire, and then you drug the hose out, and then if you were the nozzleman, you rotated to the last position, and then the backup guy, he rotated up and was the nozzleman for the next evolution. So I think we're definitely, at least around here, setting our guys up for success when they actually hit the line.
You ready, RJ? I'm going right along with you, man. I am buying the Rockville. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. Here's my analogy on it. You're going to put your ego aside and realize you ain't as good as you think you are at doing any of this stuff. Just go over to YouTube, type in house fire, and watch how many people look like a bunch of jack wagons. Sorry, Chief, I had to use it. Because they can't get their SCBA on. They can't make a stretch. They can't do that. Oh, wait, guess what? Guess who's been that jack wagon before? This guy. And I start off my classes and I show this complete video of this guy screwing up everything, screws up the stretch, screws up the assessment. And by the way, it's a hoarder fire. And there's the guy travels it. But if you take that ego aside, and my best way, RJ, to play on what you're talking about with football, how many times do they videotape your practice? We've got a new football coach here in West Virginia, Neil Brown, and he analyzes everything. If you put your ego aside, pick up your cell phone and videotape your guys and yourself with these walkthroughs, you're going to start pinpointing where you can be more efficient and effective on the fire ground. And it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt your ego. It's going to hurt your bravado. But if you put that aside and say, listen, we're not here to point out RJ's or Chief Halton's shortcomings. We're here to fix it. You're going to talk about some performance. It's going to improve drastically, rapidly.
Man, so it's funny. So funny you say that, right? 2 months ago, when we did the Humpday Hangout, I had Lieutenant Bob McKay from my department's training division, and we talked about the new in-service training program that we implemented. And one of the things that Bob talked about was how we video record the in-services. A lot of people don't realize it when they're in the moment, what they actually look like. Not only what they look like, what they sound like. So, his whole plan with the recordings was, hey, so after each recording, when we have, or after each scenario, when we have a hot wash, he sends back each crew that came, he sends back the tape. So everybody has game tape on their performance. And, a lot of officers have said, man, I didn't realize it literally took me that long to force a door. And honestly, forcible entry was one of the biggest shortcomings we were able to identify in our department. And it's mainly our fault. It pains me to say, but it's our fault as instructors, mainly because we do a really extensive forcible entry portion with them when they come through academy, and then they don't get nothing else. So it's on the individual to learn on their own. You get some young guys who's never been in the fire service, who don't have an officer to push them to learn, who don't know where to go to get this material. We failed. We failed them miserably. And it's not noticeable till they get their game tape and they say, wow, it took me 3 minutes to force this door. We had one crew, it took them 8 minutes to force the door. So it took them 8 minutes to force the door. What was the problem? Well, the problem wasn't that they didn't know how to force the doors. The problem was we didn't have anything for them to see or do a practice on. Okay, cool. We'll fix that. That's our end. We made sure now that we have a forcible entry prop that goes around to the stations, and it literally they'll call ahead. Hey guys, 2 tours from now we're going to be at your station with the forcible entry prop, playing 4 hours of your day.
RJ, we had a really successful incident. We run the triple fold where I work. I work on a Quint, and though it's a bad word, you can cuss me later off thing. But we've got long driveways, long setbacks, and we are the truck company, the only truck company that's coming. So we had a new guy come in. I was like, hey, let me show you this triple layer load. I know that you guys don't run it down on your wagon. Let me show you this. We went out and pulled it. We moved that hose like 4 times. 23 and a half hours later, we're on a working fire, confirmed entrapment, victim trapped with a 5-person crew, including me. And his stretch was absolutely perfect. It was I called Chief Halton the next day, and I was like, Chief, I got to tell you, I mean, this was the perfect house fire. By the time the battalion chief got there, we had water on the fire and the victim on the front lawn with 5 guys, 5 of us.
Yeah.
It's like, I think that's where you're talking about, RJ. If we put our ego aside and get these reps in, man, I tell you, it pays off dividends. Huge.
Yeah, the reps is the biggest thing, dude. So we got 3 reps in last night. And I felt like, all right, with the call volume, in between that, guys resetting the stations and everything like that. Like, I don't know, man. I just kind of felt like, man, I needed like 4 more.
Now you got game tape.
But you got to have game tape, because I think people need to see it. I mean, look at any good football team. They are studying the opponent's game tape. They're studying their own game tape. They're critiquing every little thing all the way down, and they do it in slow motion. I was in where was I at? I was in Delaware last weekend doing the Memorial Writ Training for Jerry Fickus, and I was talking to those guys about movements. I was talking to those guys about game tape and studying football, right? And like I told these guys, if you ever look at Peyton Manning, no matter what your football team is, whatever you think about anybody else, Peyton Manning was the king of knowing his team's movements, knowing the other team's movements, and adjusting his team on the fly to the other team's movements. Right? Remember what Peyton Manning's thing was when he had to change something up? Omaha, right? So and I told you guys, you got to remember Omaha, man, right? We can spend all night in the back parking lot of the firehouse, right? And I can show you how to force an inward swinging left-handed door, right? I can show you how to stretch a line from the officer side of the rig, right, to the structure, okay? And we can do this 3 times tonight, right? We pull up in the middle of the night. Now you have an inward swinging door to the right, and now you got to pull the line off the rear, and you have 2 parked cars there. What do we do? Omaha. You know what I mean? So being able to adjust on the fly, That's also another thing that we have to teach our people, because we can play these scenarios out all day long, and then the very first one they get is not the one they practice for, and then they're deer in headlights, you know?
So I think that everything everybody says is great, and I love it. I think that obviously drill, preparation, all that's critically important. But there's some really interesting stuff that I think we've all been following. I think we ought to look at, and Dennis has been probably more on top of it than any of us. When I came on, we had 3-inch hose for supply line, and 2.5 and 3-inch, and we had 1.5-inch line that we were fighting fire with. Over time, we had 1.75 inch. Then we had, two inch, and we're really starting to see some true diameter 2-inch, and we're seeing people who are, Dennis, you're real aware of what Gustin and the boys are doing down in Miami-Dade with the 2-inch, and so getting the line there is one thing, getting the required flow is the other. If we all agree that the fundamental doctrine of the fire service is putting water effectively on the fire, and really everything else is interesting, and I'm not discounting, the need for forcible entry and ventilation and all that other good stuff. That all enables us to get that water effectively to see the fire. So I want to throw it out there and let Dennis kind of kick us off first with some of the facts and some of the data about what we're seeing now with the ability to move water. I think greater amounts of water with reduced friction loss, and in a hose that is better constructed, in my opinion, more durable, and more responsive to our physical environment and where we fight fire today. So irrespective of what kind of load you pull, irrespective of all of that, considering we've got well-trained teams, Dennis, what are your thoughts right now about the 2-inch and the true diameter and flow rates? And because I'll just be honest, man, when I started fighting fire back in the 70s, we were throwing $1.50, maybe $1.80 at the fire. And that's pretty much what people are flowing today. And we know the NFPA standard says it should be 300 gallons for interior structural firefighting. But the reality of it is, and I've seen everybody's videos, most folks are charging in with that first line. The backup line ain't there, and they're throwing $1.50 and $1.80. And the fuel loading today, since the 1940s and the advent of plastics, that's the 1940s, not 2014. That's not when we got rid of legacy fire. Legacy fire loads were pretty much gone by the time I was freaking born in the 50s, for goodness sakes. We got tons of papers from FDIC from the 40s and 50s about the evolution of plastics. My Aunt Connie, Italian gal, had every piece of furniture in her home covered in plastic before I was born. And so, and it's just gone nuts since then. And so we know the fuel loads are up, but our flow rates really haven't really gotten dramatically up. But now the capability is really rocking. And so, Dennis, why don't you take us down the road of, determining flow rates, and where's that going to? We still use the anecdotal NFPA or NFA rather, and some folks go all the way back to the old percentage of involvement and all that stuff, which is moonshine. A bunch of gypsies came up with that nonsense. So why don't you take us down the road to what we're looking at with hose and water movement today, and then maybe we can all chime in.
Well, first off, I had the privilege of serving on the stream study with another member on this Humpday Hangout, Jake Hoffman. And I totally agree with you, Chief. Like legacy fuel models, at best were gone by the 70s, where everything was basically plastic. So as far as application rate, I don't think anyone's really quantified accurately. The Iowa formula was a stab at it, but it's mainly an indirect attack. The National Fire Academy formula is a survey-based, non-scientific study that basically is fairly accurate. I do think we have one thing really working on our favor, is that vent profile has become the limiting factor of PTUs produced on the fireground. So if we find a flow rate that basically is working for different compartment sizes now, I don't think it can get any worse. We're out of oxidizing agent. Now, one way I think I can prove this is if you go back, you've always had discussions of wind-driven fires in the fire service, but they've become more common now. That's because the fuel load had so much BTU in it that's not being used when you produce a forced induction, whether it's wind or you've changed that profile negative yourself. There's additional fuel that can be burned. because oxygen is not moving. So going back to RJ's thing about the door prop, right? So they have a door prop that goes around to train people how to force doors. They're using a Halligan, not a hooligan. So it's like Halligan versus hooligan. Who on this webcast would want a hooligan in their hands when they're forcing a door? Nobody, because everyone understands the innate value of the design of the Halligan. What was truly missing in the American Fire Service for a variety of reasons, but mainly because we went to 100 psi nozzle pressure. And nozzle pressure should also be discussed as back pressure. From the nozzle out, from the nozzle to the seat of the fire, that's stream, that's nozzle pressure. From the nozzle back to the rig, that's back pressure. The higher the back pressure in the hose, the more material you can take out of it, the more you can make it lay flat, which because it has this hydraulic force on it. But at the higher nozzle pressures, it becomes difficult to have that first line flow 150 gallons a minute. At 150 gallons a minute, 100 psi, you're dealing with about 75 pounds nozzle reaction, and it becomes hard to open flow in advance. And the UL studies really quantified that an open nozzle is a good nozzle on the fireground. Using the stream reach and then effectively the nozzle reach as you advance should be something that occurs simultaneously. And I used to do this thing I called like a Coke and Pepsi challenge. I would just lay out a bunch of different nozzles, cover them up so you didn't know what pressure or gallonage they are, line up a bunch of different 1 3/4, tape over the pump panels, discharge pressures. And I would get a bunch of firefighters on the nozzles and I'd say, you tell me when that feels right. So we'd throttle up, they get a stream, they say, this one feels pretty good. And I'd peel back the numbers, record it. You could do it with a flow meter too. But then I went back and what I discovered is it doesn't matter whether you had a 100 PSI nozzle in your hand or a 75 or a 50 PSI operating nozzle in your hand. Everybody pretty much maxes out at 60 pounds nozzle reaction. And when I say 60 pounds nozzle reaction, it has to be a hose and nozzle setup that can do these 3 things well. You should be able to flow directly overhead with just your arm movements, 90 degrees up, 90 degrees left, and 90 degrees right. And in the small attack package, the Halligan version, you should be able to flow over your shoulder. So how do we get there? How do we get to flowing that combined 300 and having a line that works? Well, we got to look at like tube velocity. We got to look at back pressure. We got to look at the weave. Unfortunately, all of us have a grinder in our shop and we can put an indicator for the forks on there. We can go down to the shoulder of the pike and we can square that off so we can do a close hit for forcible entry. None of us can go into our garage and decide to mess with our looms. So it took partnership between hose manufacturers and hose and nozzle instructors. And I kind of started a group. It just wasn't me. I couldn't go to them and just have them mess around with hose design. I needed backing of other people in my peer group. But when it comes down to it, you can't get something for nothing. If you're a 150 up shoulder Minuteman department, you're probably going to have to spec a hose that lays a little flatter. So maybe you need to be in a 75 PSI nozzle, So all of this stuff impacts each other, from hose construction to nozzle pressure. But what I've really found is between 50 and 70 pounds nozzle reaction, that's really what you have in the small line. And in the large line, you really have between 90 and 110. And if it's not mobile and flowable in an open condition on a fireground, I do not define that as a hand line attack package system that is effective. It's less than effective. So how do we practice all this stuff? How do we load it up? Well, you can't take the engine out of service and lay hose all the time. Build a prop. Adam Mayers does the engine company zero stuff. Have a prop that mimics your hose bed. One of the consultings I did in Palo Alto, they made a 2-scale metal hose bed prop at the right height with a full tailboard that you set it up, and it's behind their station. It's on wheels. They can roll it around the drill ground and change the way it's deployed. Work with vendors, get different specs of hose. Now that we have a wide variety of offerings of hose that meet the low pressure model that the fire service is going to. Because honestly, inside a structure fire at 50 PSI nozzle pressure, that water's traveling away from you at 60 miles an hour. We have a hard time keeping water close to us inside residential compartments. That's one of the reasons we flow into the overhead, not only get that cooling, but keep water close to us. So it's going to be a partnership between like ULFSRI, NIST, fireground experts, subject matter experts that are in the field, and then ultimately vendors to get the perfect cake. And those cakes are going to be slightly different depending on the jurisdiction you're working in and your staffing. So, they said Omaha, how to change. Too many people don't know that they're not even close to where they should be. You just don't know what you don't know until you start messing with the stuff. Think of how many people had a hooligan in their hand and that's all they knew, and then they got a Halligan. So equipment spec and layout really means something in the fire service, and these studies are very important. And I would like to hear from Jake about what he thought about the stream study.
Sorry. No, I agree with Dennis. I think that the portability of and handling of that hand line is huge. I know, especially for my department, to be honest, most guys, they just came to me and said, "Hey, what was this study all about? What do I need to know?" Like, I watched the videos, but I'm not reading 700 pages of science. Like, what did you guys figure out? And you can tell them numbers all day long, and they're like, "No, just tell me. You know the numbers. Tell me what I need to know." And that was some of the things that we talked about. Was you got to know what you're flowing. One of our biggest problems in Toledo historically, and I know Dennis and I have talked about this ad nauseum, is for the longest time in Toledo, people associated PSI with flow. Like, everybody knows GPMs, gallons per minute, but you would try to charge. We used to have 100 PSI nozzles, and you would try to charge it at an appropriate pressure, and they're like, "Wait, are you kidding me? There's no way I can handle that." Well, we're also not flowing enough water. And I think part of that stemmed out of the fact that a lot of the fires we go to are in vacant homes. And half of those might be jammed full of crap where you come in the front door and you're climbing up an extension ladder onto a couch. But most of them are just empty. So for the longest time, we figured out some of those nozzles were probably flowing around 90 to 95 gallons per minute the way that they were getting pumped. The fires were still going out. And so people kind of had that normalization of deviance where they knew it wasn't quite right, but they're just doing it anyway. And I think that some of the biggest things that I told our guys out of our stream study were you got to have control of the nozzle so that you can flow it and move it at the same time. If your pressure is too great, that you might as well not even have the line. You have to be mobile. And secondly, things such as checking for return, not being an accurate indicator of whether or not you're in a safe condition, right? I mean, a lot of people had taught that for years, that you can just give it a quick shot at the ceiling, and if water comes back down, you're going to be perfectly safe because it didn't turn to steam. And one of the tactical considerations in that report just proved that was false. It was not true. And as Dennis mentioned, the importance of flowing ahead of you and cooling as you go, throwing that water 60 miles an hour down the hallway. You don't have to crawl into the room that's on fire. Use the reach of the stream. Obviously, it's a line of sight tool. You can't bend that hose stream around a door frame into a room, but you physically just need to be mobile and be flowing enough water. And I mean, that was pretty much the Cliff Notes version that I had to break down for most of our guys that were not interested in graphs and thermocouples and heat flux.
So I agree with all that he just said, and that study really needs an owner's manual. And another thing we have to look at if you're looking at hose line deployment on the fireground is how a stream is effectively used. And I came up with this vernacular, and it was kind of adopted by the UL. There's really only three ways to apply a fire stream on the fireground. There's off plane, so that means you're not on the same level as a fire. You're either flowing up, like upstairs, you're at the bottom of the stairs, you're at the top of the stairs inside, you're flowing down, or you're outside and you're flowing up into a second story window or something like that. Off plane water application gives you like a knock back condition. It's temporary. And depending how well you do it, there's going to be some different considerations that come out from the coordinated attack study. But, you can't bend a hose stream is not totally accurate, right? We used to think you could really, work water in different compartments. But if you ride the lentil or the header part of the window, you definitely, in our study, it showed you can get more of the center of the room. But that's also true inside. If you're advancing down the hallway and the bedroom is on your left up on the fire, you should be on the right wall. And we used an inverted U or an N, lowercase n, application method in our study. It was what the instructors agreed upon. I was one of the few people that wanted something else. I wanted it more of a wall, ceiling, floor, more like a cross. Because if you come across that plane, some of that water is going to hit the king stud of the door that's open. If the hallway's dirty, we know there's an open door down there somewhere, and some of that water will predeterminately get into the room. So that's that off plane application is very weak, that knockback. You want to get on plane as soon as possible. Like if you do an exterior stream from the outside, it's a first story window and it's safe to reach in and get the base fuels, because you can only put the fire out if the nozzle's in the room of origin, right? So on plane gives you like a knockback condition. So think of it this way. If you go down the hallway and you had 2 bedrooms of fire, would you just stop at the first bedroom, flow some water on the ceiling like you would do a transitional and move on to the second bedroom? No, that's only going to give you a knockback. You could have regrowth behind you. You got to get the nozzle through the threshold of that door. You have to go wall, ceiling, up high, and then sweep the floor. And that's most effectively done with Halligan type level of standards of hose and nozzles. So, it's an attack package, reasonable reaction force, proper reach, proper GPM, proper hose, including its stiffness and its ability to resist kink, and whether you have enough tube velocity in there to wash kinks out. And then also have a pump operator. He's very good. He needs a pump panel that reads true and correct. The pressure pickups need to be in the right places. A lot of cross lays at 150 to 160 gallons a minute read 10 to 20 psi light on the gauge. So the cross, like they do all their testing off discharge 1, buy an attack package, stick it up in the cross lays. Now instead of flowing 160 gallons a minute, they're flowing 140 gallons a minute. The good thing about this, what we're discussing, is we can train up, spec, and build everything before we set the air brake on the fireground. That's why there's door props. You don't have a hose prop, but you don't have a door prop. You're doing something wrong. If you're buying the perfect Halligan and dressing it everything, and you're low bidding hose, you're doing something wrong, right? It's like Chief Halton said, and I'd like him to chime in again and reinforce it, is that like this is the base level of the American fire. It's how fires get put out. And the reason we've been so cavalier about it is that if you get any water in a 10 by 10 room, 40 to 80 gallons a minute, it's going to go out. It's what's occurring is when we get behind that Omaha moment and we're in an ineffective attack package, and then we go, well, that was a tough fire. That room of origin was hard to get to, so we burned up the floor of origin, and the house is on the ground, but we saved the neighbors. We self-evaluate, so there's really no true scrutiny. If we were cops, we would be in court all the time trying to figure out what we did wrong.
If we were cops, there'd be no more bad guys. Who are you kidding?
Yeah.
So let me unpack some of that really quickly. So a lot of what we've learned about application, especially exterior application, we know that the vast majority of that water is hitting the back wall. And so we did that with the capture, the cone capture. And that was one of the things from the study that Dennis and I and Jake and everybody else who paid attention to that study discovered. And we thought, as was widely believed, that if we hit from the outside, that the droplets would fall like an August rain. But we found that most of it was actually deflecting to the back wall, and some was, dropping onto the burning material. So, which is interesting. The other things to unpack inside there is we definitely have a greater understanding of vent limited fires. And I think we've had that since the time of James Braidwood back in 1880 when he was writing for the London Fire Brigade about how to, we used to have a door man or a door person now who would keep the door closed in order to control ventilation into fires. Unfortunately, modern building techniques have given us these gigantic open floor plans. And even with the close the door stuff, we can capture, like in my home, maybe the bedrooms and the study, but the vast majority of my dining room, my kitchen, my living room are all interconnected, and there's no way to segment them. So we can have tremendous amounts of fire, even just a residential home. And so the movement of those hose lines, and to Dennis's point, what he was talking about is called internal friction loss. And when you're speccing an engine, the NFPA standard says that the pickup sensor, which tells you what the pressure is inside that supposedly 2-inch diameter hose, unless it happens to hit a quicksand, which interior diameter is only 1.1 inches, so you've got a reducer on that crosslay, if you're still using crosslays, to think about. But to the point, the pickup sensor is generally off the manifold. So that's giving you a false reading, because especially if it's hard plumbed, right? If you've got hard piping, you've got this Rube Goldberg mousetrap game of plumbing, and every one of those elbows, 90s and whatever, are friction loss, right? And so that's not calculated into the pressure that you're seeing on your pump. Your pump is seeing the pressure right off the manifold. So to Dennis's point, if you're on a specking committee, be explicit about having that pickup sensor near the discharge. Now, keep in mind that if that discharge goes to, say, a top crosslay, there may be a chick swan, which is a reducer. Be aware of that. So the whole system, and Dennis is just spot on, is a system, right? It's like we used to look at any room as an assembly, right? You couldn't just talk about the walls independently. You couldn't talk about the floor independently. You couldn't. It's an assembly. It's the same thing with your water delivery system. It's not just the nozzle, and it's not just the hose. It's everything from the tank or the water supply to the discharge of that nozzle. And so there's a lot to unpack in there. And point and shoot nozzles, the fog nozzles, we taught people different methodology than we teach people with smoothbore nozzles, where you want to deflect them in order to break the stream up, and air aspirating nozzles. So there's a world of choices out there for the thinking firefighter, which is what Jake and Dennis and Ryan and RJ and I are encouraging you to be. Because there's no one, like I own, well, unfortunately, all my guns actually disappeared in a boating accident in case one of these people running for office happens to get elected. But otherwise, you don't select the weapon you're going to use as a catch-all. It's got to fit the event, the context. And so that's why we have stacked smoothbores. So you can have 1.1 inches, you can have 1.5 inches, you can have an inch, whatever you think you might need for that flow rate. And then to Dennis's point, there's a really interesting study, Dennis. I got to get you on, and I apologize to the audience for a moment here, but just a personal moment. Remind me, there's some cats out of Maryland. Years ago, the FDNY, during our nozzle studies, Mike Stein and Monticelli, I can't remember Monticelli's first name, went to the New York Measures people, and they built a nozzle reaction device, which was pretty accurate. And it matched most of the straight pipe flow numbers, pretty much, give or take a pound or two. But what was interesting is that there's some cats out of Maryland who are physicists, and they're interested in the fire problem, who came up with some radically interesting numbers about nozzle reaction. I got to share the study with you. The math was really some pretty interesting math. But anyway, to everyone's point, drill is critical. Flow rate is critical. Understanding the whole system, because what we found, and Dennis was talking about weave earlier, the interior pattern on your hose can actually affect the friction loss in that piece of hose. And if you're still using cotton jacketed rubber lined hose, you can have a myriad of problems that aren't visible to the eye, and you'll never discover from pressure testing. They'll still pressure test. If you're using your hose as an airbag, God bless you, pressure test it. But if you're using your hose to deliver water, my recommendation is to flow that water and measure it with a calibratable exterior water meter that you take on the intake side, because water is a non-combustible substance. Whatever comes in has to be going out. It's pretty simple stuff, basic physics. And then, learn how to use a pitot. It's a pretty simple tool to use. This is just the stuff that, and Dennis and I and RJ and Ryan and Jake were talking earlier. We feel these are the fundamentals for the firefighter. Beyond just throwing a ladder and knowing how to pull hose, you really ought to be able to evaluate your water delivery system. And failure to do that is, I think it's a failure that's just not excusable anymore. And in basic training, in just basic training. And I'm not saying that everyone has to be a master pump operator, but they should understand the basic fundamentals in getting water from either a standing water supply or a hydrant to the seat of the fire, and how to replicate that in a variety of circumstances. And I just think that's so critical. And I think that, we tend to fall into these, and to Dennis's analogy, I think he said Coke or Pepsi, or it's a, taste great, less filling kind of thing, right? Like I use a smooth bore all the time, or I use a fog nozzle all the time, right? Man, there's a need for a wide variety of nozzles in the American Fire Service, because we go to a wide variety of fires. So, the advocacy for one tool as a catch-all, man, I've been married for 44 years. And if I used the same methodology every time, I would have been married for 4 years or less.
So this is a good thing about methodology. If you don't mind my interruption, Chief.
No, please.
When we talk, and I'm going to have Ryan and RJ weigh in on this. Another really critical point that became pretty obvious to me that I would do different now, that if I was still a line firefighter, this is how a backup line was always defined to me. First off, I was fortunately enough to be trained that most second lines on the fireground are secondary nature. They're going to the floor above. They're charged outside as a safety. And the person who defined a backup line to me on my job was equal or greater volume, easily stretched at least one length longer. And it becomes a backup line if it's directly supporting a failing line at the same location. All right.
No,
Go ahead.
That is not that. Okay, so I hate to say official definition, but a backup line, and maybe that was right in the Oakland area, but a backup line was always supposed to be with the primary line, irrespective of the primary line's functionality. In other words, if it was flowing fine, there should be a second crew with a backup line. That was the original structural approach, and over time, it just got.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Like Seattle's changing their engine book right now, and it was primary line to, let's say, Division 2, secondary backup line of the primary line to Division 2, and you would have the repeat on Division 3. So I'm getting to a point here, and I'm glad you brought that up, right? So let's say we have a fire in a multiple story building. Let's say the fire's on the 3rd floor. That's going to be a dry stretch. It's an apartment building. No one's going to charge a line on the ground and try to get up to the 3rd floor. So you go up to the 3rd floor, you discover the hallway's clean. You get down there, you flake it, you test it in the hallway. The truck's in the door. You're all ready to go. You're all masked up. Okay. So where's the second line going to be for that? Well, the second line, the backup line or secondary line, to me, it's a secondary line until it's called into service as a backup line. But again, that basically has to be a dry stretch. It has to go in. So if the first stretch was 5 lengths, the second stretch should be 6 lengths, because it might operate on floor 4 above the seat of the fire, right? So the second line in a multiple story building should be at least 1 length greater than the first line, because the first line couldn't stretch a length, or most likely it's going to be operated on the floor above if you get fire extending the floor above. So there's your 2 lines. That's labor intensive. Like you're going to do a 5-length dry stretch for the apartment on fire and a 6-length dry stretch in the building for the secondary. Could be a backup, could be operated on the floor above. Now you're the IC out on the street and you hear a Mayday, something's changed. You see 3 windows blowing fire out of the third story. You see the secondary line starting to go in dry. How can we back up the Mayday and change conditions rapidly on the 3rd floor? Now, I was always told the backup line has to be in the same place, but it's clear that reflex time of getting that dry second line up there and to put a nozzle's a line of sight device, they're probably being wind impacted or there's some rapid change in fire behavior, is having a nozzle right next to the first nozzle the solution here. So could I have someone quickly stretch a line off a bumper and put water into the 3rd story windows? And would that make it better for the firefighters declaring a Mayday? I was taught absolutely not. Like if you put water in from the outside, you're going to invert the thermal condition. You're going to take all the heat from the top and you're going to drive it to the bottom. We haven't been able to reproduce that yet. You get cooling from top to bottom. And Florida just had a VES rescue with a lady not in an SCBA where they applied an exterior stream, and she's talking and walking. Right? It's going to be a presentation at FDIC, I believe, from Stone. So Dan, some of this data to me is showing like if I was jammed up on the third floor and something was going wrong and someone could put water into the third floor and solve my immediate problem, I'm pretty much double thumbs up on that. What do you guys think? Because it's going to change the way people think about backup lines. RJ, Ryan, care to weigh in?
Jake? We lose Jake?
Yeah.
Go ahead, RJ.
So
I think I'm here.
I was actually with you, Dennis, about the theory on the whole backup line. That's how we were taught. I'm always a little dicey about engine operations because I don't do it that often. I'm on a rescue.
So you're doing a VES. You're doing a VES in a room that has a rapid change in fire behavior. And let's say you're on the second or third floor and you declare the Mayday. Do you want to stream in that window or do you not want to stream in that window?
So I think before I answer that question, this goes back to the whole pushing a fire argument. And honestly, here's the deal, man. Like if I can get as much heat out of there as quickly as possible, what's going to do it? You know, and we were always taught that you just never open up a stream from the exterior and put it on the interior. And I don't know. I would throw it back at the guys who know science more than I do, and just I think more than ever, people want to know the whys of the culture of the fire service now versus this is what we were told to do and this is why you do it or you don't do it. But like going back to what we were just talking about, that's how we were always taught. We were always taught that the backup line was a line that comes in behind the primary line and it supports the initial operations. Especially when you have basement fires, that kind of thing. Your backup line is protecting the stairwell, protecting fire from wrapping around the initial line. Your backup line. So as far as the size of the line, we were always taught that you always want to have equal or greater length line. It was what we were always taught. And as far as shooting water through windows or shooting water from the exterior to the interior, we were always taught that. I'd be honest to say, Dennis and Jake, that you guys, if listening to you talk, Dennis, I'm sitting here like, man, I got a lot more to teach these guys because I need to follow these guys a little more because I'm learning stuff from you guys right now that I had no idea about, to be honest with you. I was just always thought this is what we don't do, and that's the reason, and that's it.
Think about what Chief Halton just said earlier, right? So he's in a house that has big open floor plan, right? So I've always was told the backup lines equal or greater. So when I train company officers, when they give a radio report, a CAN report for a second line, I told people you're an a-hole if you don't say where you're at, what size line you need, and how long it should be. If you just say I need a backup line on my location, it's not enough information. My CAN report for backup line. But look at Chief Halton's house. You show up, application rate for that initial knock's going to be everything, right? So you're going to get to the front door, and it's going to be lightly staffed company, maybe if he doesn't live in an urban environment, and they're going to flow a 2.5 in that front door. Well, that 2.5 has great stream rates, right? It knocks down the kitchen that was involved into the open living room that involved that big couch, but all that fire in that small space probably spread to the upstairs. Do you want to continue to push that 2.5 on the floor, or do you want the officer to get on the radio? Hey, we've knocked Division 1 with a 2.5. Engine 2, when you get on scene, stretch a 200-foot 1 3/4 to my location, right? So now we're backing up a larger line with a smaller line, and that's clearly something that should be considered based on the water mapping and stream mobility. Like I can put a 2.5-inch line somewhere and fail to extinguish a fire. Now I have a good video from the Stockton Fire Department that shows a guy full of 2.5. There's a nickel's worth of fire left around a corner, and he's operating. He shuts down. You see him drag it forward a little bit. A real line, visual cues on the fireground aren't always super accurate. It looks like there's a huge body of fire in front of him, but it's probably like a chaise lounge on fire around the corner. What he really needed was a small line to come back him up. So now we're like, okay, when we call for a backup line, should we downsize based on mobility, right? When I have a Mayday on the third floor, should I tell the chief, put water in this building immediately, right? So, and this is all coming out of NIST, which is separate from ULFSRI, that NIST had started their own stream study, and ULFSRI has done their own thing. And then it's also now being practically seen in the streets. So, and Seattle's changing the way they're doing backup lines. New York's in the middle of rewriting their engine book. LA City's starting to explore some of this stuff and changing nozzle packages. So we have this renaissance going on in the fire service that's going to lead to better suppression, and we're lacking the communication. We need to be communicating more. So what I say doesn't take RJ by surprise. So there's a lot of good data out there that's just not getting communicated properly. And the way I look at it,
I would say that your last statement there is 100% accurate, right? There's a lot of data out there that's not being communicated to the fire service. I'll be honest with you, Dennis, like listening to you, I'm like, Dennis has a lot of good points that I never would have considered. This is not anything that I was able to see, pick up, or read. This is something that I just learned doing Humpday Hangout with you. And so literally, I think your last line literally was 100% accurate by saying there's a lot of good data out there that's not communicated in the fire service. I teach a lot of Mayday programs. Never once ever taught somebody that concept of relaying what size hose line you need and the Mayday operations.
And the location. It might not be to your location. So the colony just had a wind-driven fire. I met with the chief down there. I consulted in the colony. They're in 7/8 smooth bores. They got a dialed-in attack package. Everything's good. They go to this fire. It's slightly wind impacted. There's a guy stuck at the front door. There's reports of civilian traps, so he holds his position. And he did receive some burns. So I asked the chief, what was the next move? And he was talking about taking a bigger line to the front door and certain things. I'm like, to me, it was a one-story ranch home, to my understanding. You know, Scott Thompson could weigh in later when he listens to this, but I do know some of the facts. And a line to the same location flowing the same amount of water, even if one length greater, would not have helped at that fire. You could have literally have taken a real line around to the inlet side and made conditions much better. Not that I'm advocating for the real line, right? So this goes back to transitional attack. Let's say you're a lightly staffed fire department and you've gone.
I got to interrupt you for 1 second because I've got a hard break for me. You guys can continue on. I've got a hard break. I've got a meeting I've got to be on. But two things. Obviously, and RJ, don't feel bad. There's a lot of information. We're constantly learning and evolving. That's why we do these things. I mean, that's why we have these hangouts, these conversations. We're going to have this conversation again. I'm going to bring, you guys can continue on. I just have to make this meeting, but we're going to have this conversation again. And there were two other folks who couldn't be with us, Paul Wallington and Kirk Isaacson, who wanted to be here, but they couldn't make this one. They're going to join us on the next one, and we're going to continue this conversation. But to Dennis's point, really quickly, that's why we carry the can also, because lots of times, you know, you can get a lot of fire knocked down after the main body's knocked down with that can, or even before the main body's knocked down, which is another discussion to have. And then the other point that I think Dennis is making very well is that the backup line traditionally and in practice follows the primary line. It doesn't mean that you cannot call for an additional line to a different location in order to get a more effective knockdown done. And again, it just goes to my pet peeve is that there's no policy, there's no procedure, there's none of that SOG or SOP that's going to fit every single fire. And if you believe that, I got some swampland in South Jersey that'll sell you cheap. Every fire has its own unique characteristics, requirements, and it's all about learning as much as you can about every tool we have. Look at the fire we just had in Detroit the other day, nursing home, modern construction, sprinkler systems out, and the wind is blowing, right? So that is where they had to fight. Those are the conditions they had to fight that fire under. And so none of that it was predictable. And the manageable side of it from one of the most elegant fire departments in the country was wonderful. And it was basically just applying as much water as they humanly could to try to combat that incredibly ferocious fire. So just a lot to unpack, a lot to think about. I want to thank everybody before I ran off. Please continue the conversation. You got another 10 minutes or so to burn, but I've got to get to this deal or they'll fire me again. So my apologies.
Hey Chief, let's do the same thing. Next month we'll just pick it back up. with these same guys and get Kurt on too.
If everybody's in, I'll get Kurt and Paul, and then we're back next month.
Yeah. You guys down?
Sounds good to me.
I gotta check my flights. I'm probably gonna be in St. Louis, so if I'm not on an airplane, I'll be on the podcast.
Love you all, brothers.
This will be jet setting.
So the points I'm trying to make is an urban guy. When I was in the stream study, I was really convinced that we were going to push a lot of fire in the hallway because we've had members burned before like that. Now I'm kind of thinking it was probably a vent profile thing. We probably had a window open behind the nozzle team in the stairway. We had a different apartment opened. And that's a lengthy. Daryl Liggins was one of the members involved. He'd be able to explain what occurred better. But once I saw the data and started looking at it, instead of crying about it, I go like, now my glass is half full. I have a whole nother tactic or strategy I can deploy on the fire ground that will help in emergent conditions. Hey, if you got a fire on the 3rd floor of a 5-story walk-up building, that first line has to be a dry stretch. That second line has to be a dry stretch. But why can't we have a charged hand line out in front in case something goes wrong, even in a building of that size, right? So 1-story ranch, vent profile change, right? They're under wind conditions now in the colony. I'm not a huge fan of door control on single family homes, but now you have a wind condition impacting the Charlie side that's impacting the advancing of the line. Can I get to the Charlie side and change the vent profile? Probably not. Can I change it from the Alpha side? Can I now choke that door down? And now the wind has no place to go behind the nozzles teams. So it's going to feel like a dramatic cooling effect at the nozzles, right? I could have the door chocked wide open thinking it's going to be a normal advance. And they're going to be training plenty of air and get down a seat. Something changes. The outside vent man takes a window. He's in turnouts, right? One of the bad things about being in turnouts on the fire ground and having your gloves on and everything, when you're outside vent man, you might not realize the wind condition on the backside of the building. And once you take that glass, there's no going back. That's changed the vent profile forever. So can I change it at the front? Could I go from a chocked open door to a controlled door? Could I bring a line around the back? So until you don't understand these primary ingredients, until we don't get a better understanding of what flour does, what sugar does, what eggs do, and what butter does for a cake, you'll never make a good cake. So the fire dynamics that are coming out of this stream study and the victim package stuff, for me, honestly, there's only 2 perfect hits on the fire ground for a fire stream. Exterior fire needs exterior water. So who's been to a fire in a house and they've advanced to the back and you realize, oh shit, this was a deck fire that worked its way in, right? Many people who do a 360 probably haven't been in that situation before. In my city, a lot of the buildings were attached. Charlie side report came from the roof, and you get there and you go like, oh shit, there's heavy fire at the back of the building. How do we get a line to the back of the building? You might have to go through an adjoining apartment and get to the back area of the house to flow water to get the deck out. But exterior fire always needs exterior water to fix it. And interior, for better or for worse, Gesundheit. For better or worse, interior fire needs good interior water at the base to do final extinguishment. And then once you understand these primary ingredients, which vent profile, it means a lot now and should be heavily discussed. Now you can do what Chief Halton was saying and RJ and Jake was saying. Now you can make that cake happen on your fire ground. And now if you get organic, good eggs, cane sugar, that's all spec and layout stuff. Organic flour, you have like the perfect Halligan bar. Now you can achieve gold standard performance on the fire ground.
You just leave it at that. Dennis just.
wait. Hold on, RJ. I got
Drop
you, man.
the mic.
I got you. Ready?
I am the official co-host saying we're gonna leave it with Dennis's words to live by right there. Those right there, like I am mind blown. First of all, now I have research to do. Second of all, and third of all, and I gotta go figure out how to make the perfect cake. So
all good goals in life.
Oh boys, I thought this was awesome, man. I really did. it's funny, man, when I do these things, man, it's like, a lot of times I find myself engaging in conversations, and a lot of times it's very, very amazing the things you pick up. And today was even cooler, man, because like now I really, really want to go research some things and look at some stuff that Dennis was talking about, because honestly, even though I don't ride an engine, right, it's pretty cool to understand the science behind it. And at least being a squad guy, I can tell somebody what I need based off of the conditions I can see and why I need it and what it will do for what's going on based off of what I learned from Dennis and Jake talking, that stuff. I'm right on, guys. All right, cool, man. Well, hey, next month. So we're going to do this again next month, same time, same place. Yeah, everybody in?
Yep.
Sounds good.
Cool, guys. Thank you. I'll see you guys soon.
All right, see you.
Go get on that Baker aerial scope and shoot some pics. I want to see that sucker.
I'll send them to you.
Enjoy the rest of your day, fella.
See you, boys.